And if you were so scared about our relationship getting out and risking your position, why is it that you were sleeping with this Heather girl? She's just. I needed. She. Turning his back to Jamie, Ren hid the shame that formed across his face. Your life is a joke, Ren. A lie. You can have sex with Heather all you want. But the second someone might suspect something is going on, you'll hightail it to the next town over. Or the next. Or the next until there's no one left who can accuse you of anything. You're no better than a rapist, a killer, a fucking parasite. I'm not a rapist. I'm not a murderer. I'm. Tears began to form in his eyes as Ren gazed upon Jamie staring back at him. Disappointed and embarrassment merged into one cynical look. He fell to his knees and locked his watery sight on the tears hitting the pavement below him. As he quietly sobbed, he heard Jamie's footsteps approaching him from afar. He didn't want to look at her, come face to face with his sinful nature in human form. Once the footsteps finally reached him, however, he noticed that the clacking of the high heels were replaced by the pressing of sneakers. Jamie was gone. Francis was all that remained. Ever since you took up the cloth, you've been on a downward spiral, Ren. You are right in saying you never killed or raped, but you have killed and raped something far greater. God's faith and trust in you. You indulge in every sinful pleasure you come across without so much as a thought to its purpose. The only time you even consider God is when you're in church speaking to the congregation. And even then you wonder how people, you yourself at one point, believed in such idiocy. You hold the title only for prestige, the admiration that majority of the community looks upon you with. You are constantly distracted from your ministry. You spit curses as though you were a gypsy. You support no charities except the ones that benefit yourself. You live a double life where the wrong side of you far outweighs the good. The people of your past and present signify your true nature. Your father, Victor, Jamie, and now Heather. Do you have any idea how hard it is to resist her? How hard it was to leave Jamie behind? They was beautiful, young, and they wanted me. Me! I know what I did with them was wrong, legally, and it was wrong morally, but it was consensual. How can God fault me on what I've done when she wanted it from me? Heather was only 5 months away from being legal when I met her. What does age matter when she was that close to being considered legal? I'm not a cop, Ren. I don't care if you started banging her when she was 10. She may be legal in the eyes of the government now, but she's still against your position in the eyes of God. And even now, when you're being convicted of all these things, her safety and punishment doesn't even come across your mind. You couldn't give two shits about what will happen to your sweet little Heather, just as you didn't care for all the others. At the end of the day, you only care about yourself. It was true. For all the rebuttals and debate Friend brought to the table, it was all to save his own skin. Francis knew him. He could see through Ren's words clear as day. Nothing Ren could say could justify his actions. And even if he did have something to come up with, it would have no doubt been a fabricated lie. Pleading for understanding, pleading for guidance. They both seemed to be crafty evasions to deep into the rabbit hole. He wiped his eyes and stood up to face Francis. Pleading for forgiveness seemed to be the only thing Ren could do. I am sorry for what I've done. For all of it, and whatever comes after this. I'm not the only one who you should be telling that to, Ren. And I'm pretty sure the one you should be talking to is just about done listening. So that's it then. You just come down here, label me guilty, and then just walk off? You're getting ahead of me, Ren. I haven't labeled you just yet. You've been calling me a damn man ever since you found me. I think we've talked long enough to... You're right. I think we've talked long enough. Still, there's one thing left for me to do before I go. Now is when the real fun begins. Don't blink, Ren. because you just might miss it. Before Ren realized what was happening, Francis jabbed his right hand towards Ren's face and gripped it with otherworldly strength. His index and middle fingers pressed against Ren's forehead, while the other fingers gripped against the cheekbone. Immediately, Ren began to feel an intense burning sensation radiating from his forehead and surging throughout the rest of his body, as though surrounded by a dying mob. He could hear the screams and cries of hundreds of people rattling his mind. He attempted to grab Francis's arm and push him away, but he found that all his strength had abandoned him, leaving him helpless to the dealings of his self-proclaimed executioner. Father Ren Thomas, Francis spoke loudly as if he was aware of the screams plaguing Ren's mind. Now is the time of your judgment. Between the fingers that gripped his face, Ren could see a grisly transformation began to slowly occur with Francis, like pouring paint over a blank canvas. His eyes became blotted out in a vibrant red, with small wisps of crimson escaping from his pupils like smoke coming off the butt of a lit cigarette. His teeth became a row of jagged thorns, his tongue long and pointed like a viper amongst a newly formed thicket. Blond hair decayed to an ash gray. Two bone fins bored through the sides of his head, where his ears previously were. And with each word Francis spoke, his inflection seemed to descend an octave range deeper and deeper, as if his own voice was the bridge from below. We have watched you, Ren, as we have watched all. From the day you were born up until this very moment, you grew up fallible and we gave you a chance to change, a chance to prove your worthiness to God. Yet you took up the holy mantle only to spit in defiance to the God you swore to serve. You preach doctrine only to live a secret life of sin and discourse. You are pathetic, you are feeble, and you are a waste of more deserving life. By God's command, you are banished from his kingdom, and from this day forward, till the day you join us in hell, you will walk the earth a marked man, a scourge of the earth. An erupting white flash occurred, sending Ren onto his back against the pavement. The screams had stopped, but his body was racked with pain, the epic center surging from the center of his forehead. After a few seconds of recovering from his daze, he found himself exerting much more energy with any attempt to move his body. He was weaker than before, a husk of his former self, and against the walls of the alley, Francis, back to his young male form, looked down on Ren with a devilish smile. So it's done, Francis said with malevolence. What have you done to me? Ren asked hoarsely, finding it just as hard to speak as it was to move his body. You are now, as you truly are, a plague. Your body has become that of your soul, filthy, stained, rotten. You can no longer hide your true nature. I have marked you this way, as I was tasked to do. This world has no more use for you, and neither does he. No one can save you. Your existence is that of doom. Ren wanted to jump up from his position and leave his own personal mark on Francis, but he was powerless. To think that he was getting away with everything for so long, especially in his position, was a fool's gambit. It seemed that's what he was all along, a fool, and now he was suffering for it. The only way a vengeful God could cook up, a God he served for more than 20 years, his God. This is, what? Overdramatic? You know, I'm not a big fan of reciting the speech either, but the big fella has a way of keeping with customs. Francis began to laugh to himself. Ren wasn't sure if Francis was laughing at his own sense of humor or laughing at Ren's state of anguish. In his pain, he could only think of possible routes to salvation, and in his thoughts, he only came up with one. He began to drag himself towards the sidewalk, beyond the alley, only knowing one logical place to go. Where are you going, Ren? Francis asked. I've got to have a talk with someone. Do whatever you want. You're a marked man, Father. Your judgment has already been passed. Francis stood there for a bit as Ren moved like a man who had aged 30 years in the last minute. He watched Ren writhe in pain, in only a way a demon could enjoy. It was reasonable to say Francis enjoyed his task way too much. It made him happy. It made his father happy, and most importantly, it made the boss man happy. Sometimes Francis would wonder why the boss didn't just smite down the sinners from his high perch in heaven. But Francis knew that his God was a kind God, allowing his children to have a little bit of fun too. A moan of pain caught Francis' ears. He turned to see Ren crawling his way towards the streets. Every pull of his body a struggling effort. Francis' grin stretched as far as his muscles would allow, all in a day's work. And there he stood, watching Ren drag himself to his feet and stagger around the corner of the building, out into the faint light of the streets beyond. The rain came down steadily as Father Ren Thomas approached the steps to the Ascension Catholic Church. He had no idea how long he had been walking. At some points, he ended up in the middle of the road, unsure how he got there. Other times, he staggered along the sidewalk, using building corners to support his weight when he himself was too weak to carry it alone. He was drained, exhausted by the sudden loss of all his strength and will, and yet he was so close to the church that what little hope he savored had seemed enough to carry him just a few steps more. At times during his staggering voyage, he ran into pedestrians, some who recognized him through appearance rather than his rugged shambling through the streets, but even the ones that Ren recognized avoided him, as if his skin was a plague no one wanted to catch. And maybe it was, for Ren had been marked by one of the devil's own. No one would go near him. No one would give him refuge or comfort, not even Heather Wilson. Ren gave a sadistic laugh fit for a lunatic, ignoring the saliva dripping down the corners of his lips. As he finally reached the steps of the church, Ascension loomed above him like a colossal monument, a monument to all his sins. He exerted what little strength he could muster, dragging his feet up the steps like a tranquilized slug. He would repent, pray all night if he had to, pray to a God who he had turned his back on multiple times before. He had declared him to be punished for all his selfish deeds, who had marked him as impure, a scourge of the earth. Upon reaching the top step, Ren hesitated before the massive doors of the church. He mustered a hoarse breath and moved his right hand towards the handle. A second chance was all he needed. A second chance to prove his worth to God. He heard the sizzling before he felt the pain. A surge of agony shot through his entire body, the worst of it coming from his right hand. He dropped to his knees and let out a tormenting scream. His right hand was shaking uncontrollably. His fingers locked and bent toward his palm as if he was gripping a cup that never existed. He turned his hand to examine the damage and let out a sheepish cry when he met with the sight. As if he had grabbed an iron railroad spike drenched in magma, his palm was exposing the red muscle that hid beneath the now searing skin. Around the streak of red, the flesh of his hand bubbled and blistered from the contact with the door handle of the church. His hand had been scorched, worse than any burn he had ever seen in his life, a burn worthy of the fires of hell. Though the pain from his hand was too immense to comprehend, he felt a sharp pain in his forehead, like a pulse, a throbbing with the weight of a sledgehammer. He fell into his back, lying across the top of the church steps as the rain pummeled him from above. He was wheezing, unable to move any ounce of his body in a direction he desired. "Tainted," Wren whispered. "So unclean." The tears from his eyes mixed with the falling rain, the two becoming unrecognizable. Father Wren laid still in agony, the doors to ascension shut firmly before him. In the midday sunshine, the city streets were lined with activity. Cars drove down the roads and intersections while civilians walked the sideways with personal conviction. Leaning against one of the buildings stood a lone man with graying hair and tan skin. Judging from his appearance, he looked to be in his late 50s, but his hair and clothes suggested that he had some sensibility of what popular style was. He examined the people in the city around him, how much it had changed just the last time he was there, how quickly things could change in a matter of 20 years. His train of thought was interrupted by a buzzing noise coming from his pocket. Taking the phone out, he gave one glance to the caller ID, labeled across the screen, and answered as quickly as he could. Knowing who he would be talking to, the low rumble of the voice on the other end, like a cat's purr, didn't startle him in the slightest. "Taking your time as always, I see," the voice on the phone said. "I don't see the point in rushing these things. Besides, I can see her just fine from where I'm standing. She's wearing a yellow petal dress and kissing the guy she's been seeing behind her husband's back. Get this, she didn't even take her wedding ring off. It's like she has no issue sleeping with others behind his back." The voice gave a slight chuckle. "That's why she was chosen, and that's why you're there. Speaking of which, don't you think that form you've taken is a little against your style?" Francis formed a subtle grin before returning to the voice of the phone. "It's perfect, actually," Francis replied. "From what I remember, she was into older guys." The Scourge.